Ever get that feeling like when you're looking at one of those hidden image pictures, where there's something right there in front of you, but you just can't see it?
I know exactly what you mean.
Well, today we're dealing with something hidden in plain sight, something huge. We're talking trillions of dollars here. And the thing is, it affects every single one of us.
Yeah.
We're taking a deep dive into the global protection gap.
Okay.
And while that might sound a little bit like something out of a spy movie,
Ah.
it all boils down to insurance.
Okay.
But stick with us,
Yeah.
because I promise this is way more interesting than your typical insurance seminar.
What I find fascinating about this is that it's not just numbers on a page, It's real people and businesses, and they're out there facing these risks every day. Often they don't even realize it until it's too late.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to start with. I mean, what exactly is this protection gap? Our go-to source for this deep dive is this report from B4E Insurtech, Inc. They describe it as basically the difference between the insurance coverage that would be smart to have, that you should have, versus what people and businesses actually do have.
Makes sense.
And the crazy part is, get this, in 2022 alone, that gap was a massive, are you ready for this? $1.8 trillion.
Wow.
Trillion. With a T.
That's hard to even imagine.
It's a massive number. Think about it this way. If you took that $1.8 trillion and divided it evenly among every single person in the U.S.,
Okay.
everyone would end up with an extra $5,500, just like that.
Wow.
Just poof, gone, unclaimed.
It's truly a mind-boggling amount of money, almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's roughly the equivalent of an entire country's annual economic output, Canada, for
Yeah.
example, and it just vanishes every single year. And this report really drives home the point that it's a huge missed opportunity, not just for individuals and businesses, but for the insurance industry itself. I mean, did you know that there's a $139 billion gap every year just in natural catastrophe coverage?
Really?
That's right. It's like leaving an entire nation's worth of potential revenue on the table year after year.
So with so much at stake, why aren't people and businesses, treating insurance like the hottest thing since sliced bread?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or should I say the trillion-dollar question?
My point, you're right.
This report, it does a great job of breaking down the top reasons, and to be honest, I think you'll find some of them pretty surprising. Of course, affordability is a factor, there's no doubt about that, especially when we're talking about developing economies. But the report goes deeper, digging into what they call these economic and financial barriers.
So it's more than just not having enough money for the premiums.
Yeah, it's more nuanced than that. You see, financial literacy, or should I say the lack of it, plays a huge role here. Lots of individuals and businesses, they just don't grasp the potential financial devastation that these risks can bring. They have a "it won't happen to me" kind of attitude.
Right.
And statistically speaking, that's just not accurate. It can happen to anyone.
Of course, it's human nature to think those things won't happen to us. But when they do.
Exactly. And then there's another layer of complexity, just not understanding what insurance actually covers. For example, you'd be surprised how many homeowners think their basic policies cover flood damage.
Yeah.
But in many cases, they don't. And that kind of misunderstanding, that contributes to this problem big time.
So we're looking at a $1 trillion gap here. And it's driven by things like affordability, confusing policies, and just a general lack of awareness about the very real risks that are out there.
Right.
But thankfully, this report doesn't just leave us hanging, right? I mean, it seems like there are ways to bridge this gap.
Absolutely. The report actually lays out what they call a roadmap, and it's all about how to actually shrink this gap. And the key takeaway is that it's going to take a team effort. We're talking insurers, governments, even individuals, all working together.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? What does this collaborative solution, as they call it, what does that actually involve?
Well, for one, product innovation is going to be huge. They specifically call out parametric insurance, especially when it comes to natural disasters.
Yeah, I remember them mentioning that earlier. Can you remind us what that is again?
Yeah.
And why it's so potentially game-changing?
Sure. So imagine this. A major hurricane, let's say, rips through your area. Now, with traditional insurance, you'd have to go through this whole long, drawn-out claims process, right? Documenting every little bit of damage and all that.
Right.
But with parametric insurance, you get an automatic payout. It's all based on predefined triggers.
Triggers.
Right. So let's say your policy has a trigger based on wind speed. If the hurricane winds hit a certain speed, boom, you get paid automatically, no matter what the actual damage to your property is.
Oh, I see. So it's less about proving every little thing and more about just having that safety net tied to the event itself.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's really valuable, especially in the chaotic aftermath of a disaster. People have enough on their plates. This just streamlines things, gets them back on their feet faster.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it speaks to the need for these kind of innovative approaches, right? Because the old way of doing things clearly isn't cutting it.
Right. And this report, they highlight another important piece of the puzzle, and that's the need for public-private partnerships. Basically, we need insurance companies and governments to team up.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about things like government subsidies, or maybe some kind of incentives that make insurance more affordable, especially for, say, low-income households or small businesses, the folks who might not be able to afford those premiums otherwise.
Right, so it's a win-win in a way.
Yeah.
You help individuals and businesses get the protection they need, but then you also protect the economy as a whole from those massive uninsured losses that can happen after something like a natural disaster.
Precisely. But of course, we can't forget about good old-fashioned education. The more people understand the risks, the more they understand their options, the better decisions they can make, right?
Totally.
Uh,
Knowledge is power, as
Yeah.
they say. But what does that actually look like in this context? Are we talking like mandatory insurance courses in high school?
no, not quite. But, think more along the lines of targeted marketing campaigns. Things that explain insurance in plain English that are actually engaging. Or maybe financial literacy programs that make risk management and insurance planning a core part of what they teach.
Right, so it's about meeting people where they are and making this information accessible.
Exactly.
So far, we've really focused on the impact of this protection gap on individuals and businesses.
Right.
But this report, it doesn't let us forget about the bigger picture. What happens if we, as like a global community, just ignore this trillion-dollar gap?
Yeah.
What are the consequences then?
Well, the report paints a pretty sobering picture, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
It's not good.
Yeah.
For example, imagine a huge earthquake, right?
Yeah.
Striking a really populated area, somewhere that doesn't have a lot of insurance coverage.
Right.
Think about the sheer number of homes and businesses.
And people's livelihoods, too.
Exactly, just completely upended overnight. The financial losses would be absolutely massive.
Yeah, you're talking about potentially crippling an entire local economy.
Exactly.
And it's not just the immediate impact, right? Like right after the earthquake.
Right.
It's the long-term stuff that's really scary.
The ripple effects.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Businesses shutting down, people losing their jobs, and then less spending in the economy because those people are out of work.
Right.
It can create a downward spiral.
Right.
And often, the people hit hardest are the ones who were already struggling, the ones without insurance.
Yeah, it's like this domino effect where the consequences just keep spreading outward.
Exactly. And on top of all that, think about the burden on governments.
Oh.
When a large chunk of the population is underinsured, who do you think gets called in to help?
The government has to step in.
Exactly. They have to provide all this financial aid after a disaster, which diverts resources from other essential things, like healthcare, education.
Infrastructure.
Exactly. All that suffers because of this protection gap.
So it's not just about personal responsibility, then.
No.
It's about everyone.
It's about building more resilient societies, for sure.
This report has been a real eye-opener, I have to say.
It really is a wake-up call.
It is. It's clear that understanding this whole protection gap thing, it's not just about insurance. It's crucial for building a better future for everyone.
I completely agree. The more we know about the risks we face, the better we can protect ourselves, our families.
Our communities, our world.
Exactly. Knowledge is power.
Well said. This deep dive into the global protection gap has been pretty mind-blowing, and it reminds us that some of the biggest challenges we face, they're not always obvious. Sometimes they're hiding in plain sight. So here's something for everyone listening to think about. When was the last time you actually took a look at your insurance policies? Maybe it's time to